What's up, you guys? Welcome to another video. Sean Hannity on Fox News just had a interview with JD Vance discussing the recent meeting with Zelenskyy, and he basically just doubles down. He's not backtracking at all. He's enforcing everything he said from the beginning. A lot of people there was some backlash about Vance was overstepping his boundary with Trump, kind of getting in Trump's way during the discussion. I don't think that at all. I think what you have, or what you had essentially in the Oval Office that day were two people that were strong in where they stood with America. And that was it. Zelenskyy was out of line the entire time, as far as I'm concerned, and they let him know it. So we're going to share this clip, though. It's basically the full interview with Sean Hannity, but Vance doubles down, and I like it. So let's check it out.
The president said, well, it's funny. So we have a 45-minute press conference, and the president normally does this. I mean, I've seen this now 3 or 4 times with foreign leaders where he likes to bring the media in, likes to have a conversation, but answer questions with the press. As you know, he's very open with reporters. And what I noticed is that for the first 25, 30 or so minutes, he tried to sort of bend over backwards to be gracious and kind to Zelenskyy, even when Zelenskyy was kind of needling him, even when Zelenskyy was saying things that I thought were untrue. The president just tried to be diplomatic, right? I think that's his natural instinct in that situation. And then when it really went off the rails, of course, is when I asked, or you had a Polish journalist who asked a question, the president answered it, and then I answered it. And then something about my answer just really set Zelenskyy off. So then he came at me.
So you're blaming yourself.
then I went back at him. Right. And what I tried to do originally was actually,
in the whole time Zelensky's talking, he's trying to talk over VP Vance and Trump. Like, come on, man. We've already given you billions of dollars. Show some respect. It's not that big of a deal.
What I tried to do originally was actually try to diffuse the situation a little bit, because I'm like, we're having this meeting. Obviously, there are 100 television cameras here. Let's try to have this conversation in private. And then the president, as we kept on going back and forth, I tried again to say, well, maybe we should have this conversation in private. And the president was like, nope, actually, I don't want to have it in private anymore. I want to have this actual conversation in public for the American people to see. And I do think that there was just a certain sense of, there was a lack of respect. There was a certain sense of entitlement. And most importantly, look, we can look past all of that stuff, but the president has set a very clear goal for his administration. He wants the killing to stop. And I think that it's very important that President Zelenskyy and, of course, President Putin, too, they've both got to come to the negotiating table. And that's ultimately where things broke apart. I really don't care what President Zelenskyy says about me or anybody else, but he showed a clear unwillingness to engage in the peace process that President Trump has said is the policy of the American people and of their president. That's the real breakdown, is I think Zelenskyy wasn't yet there. And I think, frankly, now still isn't there, but I think he'll get there eventually. He has to.
My understanding is he tried to get back in, or tried to stay a number of times, and then made numerous calls to come back. Is that true?
I don't know about numerous calls, but they certainly made at least one request to come back in and continue the conversation. The president was like, look, first of all, they were disrespectful. And second of all, what are we even going to talk about? They've shown a clear unwillingness to discuss the peaceful settlement that President Trump is trying to bring to the situation. I think a lot of Americans are sort of, it's useful to step back and ask ourselves, what is the actual plan here? You can't just fund the war forever. The American people won't stand for it. And by the way, Sean, if you look at European opinion polls, the Europeans aren't going to stand forever for it either. We need to bring this thing to a peaceful settlement. The president was trying to do that. He'll continue to try to do that, but you've got to have two to tango. You've got to have a negotiating partner in the Ukrainians who recognize that, of course, they have their views, and of course, they're not always going to agree with us, but they've got to participate in the conversation. They weren't willing to do that on Friday, so the president said, send them home.
He said today that the war he expects will go on a very long time. I don't know where he's going to get the money to fund that war. I have my doubts that Europe will fund the war to the level that Biden and Harris were funding it. And then the issue now has come up whether or not this administration will continue to offer money and arms for this war to continue. Because without America, I would argue the president was right in saying they have no cards.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I think our European friends, frankly, are being really, they're doing a disservice to the Ukrainians because their own populations are saying, we're not going to fund this war indefinitely. The American people are saying, we don't want to fund the war indefinitely. So the only thing that is in the best interest of America, of Russia, of Ukraine, and of Europe is to bring this thing.
The only person that wants this war to keep going is Zelenskyy, plain and simple. And there's all kinds of video of Ukrainian soldiers rounding up citizens for war. It's pointless. It's got to stop. It has to stop.
With what? With whose money, with whose ammunition, and with whose lives? The president is actually taking a much more realistic perspective and saying, this can't go on forever. We can't fund this thing forever. The Ukrainians can't fight forever. So let's bring this thing to a peaceful settlement.
When I interviewed Zelenskyy, he wouldn't give me direct answers. I asked him about the mineral deal to pay the U.S. back. To me, there's three phases in this. And my understanding was Friday was supposed to be relatively ceremonial.
It was.
And then that it was supposed to be we signed the mineral deal. That's part one. Part two would be a ceasefire. Part three would be the hardest part, the negotiated settlement with Putin, who, correct me if I'm wrong, said he's willing to talk peace with Trump.
Yeah, he said he's willing to talk peace. And of course, we trust but verify. We want to have the conversation. We don't assume that everything that anybody tells us is true. That's why we want to engage in this conversation. But you're exactly right, Sean. When the Ukrainians came to Washington on Friday, it was supposed to be ceremonial. You know, there had been some public back and forth, some disagreements, some words spoken in public. And the president was like, let's have this moment. We give some credit to the brave Ukrainian fighters. And of course, it's a very brave army that they have there in Ukraine. Let's sign this minerals deal, which importantly does two things. It allows the American people to get some of their money back, but it also shows the Ukrainian people that America has a long-term investment in their sovereignty. You do those things, we'll sign this thing, we'll have a rah-rah moment, and then we'll get to the tough talk of negotiating peace. We couldn't even get the Ukrainians to a point where they could talk about the peaceful settlement. And look, in some ways, Sean, I get it. I get the frustration. I get the rage. It's their country. Of course, it's not our country, but you've got to accept cooler heads have got to prevail. This thing cannot go on forever. This is the important point. I'd say this to our, of course, most importantly, the Americans who are watching, but people all over the world. When you talk to leaders in private, whether they're Ukrainian or European, when you talk to people in private, they will tell you this cannot go on forever. There aren't enough Ukrainian lives, there isn't enough American money, and there isn't enough ammunition to fund this thing indefinitely. The only realistic pathway to bringing this thing to a settlement is President Trump's pathway. We encourage both President Zelenskyy and President Putin to follow that path.
Well, I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent, and this came up in the discussion Friday. The Biden administration called Putin every name in the book, and they've been trying to get the president.
And he still invaded anyway.
Okay, he still invaded anyway. Well, remember, it depends if it's a minor incursion. Let's go back to that moment, which I thought as troops were amassing on the border. But I go back and I think about this, and Biden spent all of this money, called Putin, all of these names. The media and the Democrats, they want Donald Trump to call him names. And the president addressed that.
Thing.
And then he's supposed to call him and say, Vladimir, you ready to talk a peace now?
Yeah.
That's not going to work.
No, it's diplomacy 101, right? Is you have to have a reasonable relationship with somebody to be able to even start the conversation. We have to remember, Sean, Ukraine, half of the country, a third of the country is totally destroyed. The economy is depressed. You've got hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians. Of course, a lot of dead Russians as well. The president wants to negotiate a settlement. How can you negotiate if you can't even talk to somebody? And that's what he said. He's not saying, like, nobody's suggesting, as Secretary Rubio said, no one is suggesting that we give the Nobel Peace Prize to Vladimir Putin. What we're saying is it's important for President Trump to be able to have a conversation. That's not well served by standing up at a press conference and calling the guy every negative name in the book. By the way, as we just said, President Biden called Putin every single name in the book. What did it lead to? It led to war. It led to destruction. It led to conflict. President Trump is trying to bring this thing to a close. You got to be able to talk to somebody to do that.
Is the door open?
All right, guys, we're going to cut the video right there. You get the general gist of it. You know, at the end of the day, the only person that's actually concerned about what's going on in Ukraine is Zelenskyy, because he wants to line his pockets with all the American money. That's it. The killing needs to stop in both areas, Russia and Ukraine. But, you know, we're going to see how this whole thing plays out. If he doesn't agree to come to some sort of peaceful treaty, it's just not going to end in his favor. But that's it for this video, you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.